While there are a lot of great perks in Fallout New Vegas, there are definitely a lot of perks that should probably be avoided, and today I will be going over what I think are some of the worst. Now, before we start, I will admit that some of these perks are a little redeemable. For example, some perks may prove to be useful earlier on or on your very first playthrough, but become useless as you progress through the game or on subsequent playthroughs. There may also be a few perks that I say are bad that you may actually like based on your own personal quirks with how you play the game. Now, ultimately, I guess what I'm trying to say here is that if you see a perk that you like on this particular list, there is a chance that it may have one or two redeemable characteristics, depending on how you like to play the game. And for that reason, I will try to mention positive aspects for some of these perks if I feel it's warranted. But I guess without further ado, these are what I think are the top 10 worst perks to have in Fallout New Vegas, starting now. Number 10, the Swift Learner and/or Lessons Learned perks. So both of these perks basically do the exact same thing, which is boost your experience gain as you level up. The difference between the two is that the Swift Learner perk has a lower level requirement of just 2 and has 3 different ranks, with each rank providing an additional 5% XP gain. So if you have all 3 ranks, you get 15% XP gain. Now, Lessons Learned requires you to be level 26 and increases the player's experience gain based on the player's level. So if you're level 26, you'll gain an additional 26% per activity at that level. And if you're level 36, you gain an additional 36% experience per activity at that level, and so on. While both of these perks are potentially quite powerful, the problem is that both of them are useless once you hit the level cap. So provided that you always play through Fallout New Vegas to the maximum level cap, having Swift Learner and/or Lessons Learned at maximum level is simply weakening your build. Plus, I also think there are simply better perks out there that you can get at those specific levels. For example, Rapid Reload or Black Widow would be a better choice than Swift Learner, and at level 26, Nerves of Steel or Tunnel Runner would be far more useful, as both of these perks increase the player's actual abilities rather than increasing the rate at which they gain experience. I guess to be fair, this perk could go either way depending on whether you want to reach level cap or not, but for me personally, I would say that you should avoid it. Number 9, the Retention perk. Maybe it's just me, but I'm not really a fan of skill magazines in Fallout New Vegas. While I will totally admit that they do work and can improve your character's abilities, I've never liked the fact that the effects of them are merely temporary, and for that reason, I tend to prefer skill books instead, as these are guaranteed to boost the player's skills permanently. What Retention basically does is allows the player to benefit from the temporary boosts to their skills for 3 minutes as opposed to the standard 1. And while this is a pretty good buff, I think you'll find that you're really just better off raising a particular skill to a specific level rather than relying on the temporary boosts afforded by skill magazines. Or, like I just mentioned earlier, you're better off seeking out skill books, which provide less of a bonus, but ultimately allow you to increase your abilities permanently. Now, again, to be fair, I can admit that this can come down to player preference. Maybe you like the temporary boosts that magazines provide, but as for me, I'd rather pick another perk. Number 8, the Quick Draw perk. So, the Quick Draw perk is debatably good, however, I'm of the opinion that it is quite bad. On the one hand, I could see why some players might want this perk, because if you do end up compulsively unholstering and holstering your weapons constantly, then having Quick Draw might actually not be so bad for you. However, the issue that I have with the Quick Draw perk is that if you're usually out and about in the wasteland, you're most likely going to have your guns drawn anyway. That way, you can react to whatever potential threats that end up coming your way. Then, while you're in town, you can holster your weapons because you're probably not going to be getting in fights all that much. My only other guess is that Quick Draw is nice for people that don't like the movement penalty that's incurred by equipping certain weapons. The thing is, I would say that for the vast majority of weapons that have movement penalties, that most of the movement penalties aren't really that bad to begin with. But at the end of the day, I guess you could pick this perk based on your playstyle and your individual quirks, but I would also say that in the vast majority of cases, and for the vast majority of people, that this particular perk is simply going to be a waste of points. Number 7, the Lead Belly perk. While I suppose Lead Belly is nice provided you end up consuming irradiated water or food, the problem is that I think there are simply too many ways to cure your radiation to make it even remotely useful. For example, you could simply use Radaway or go to a vendor to cure your radiation. There's also the fact that purified water is relatively cheap to purchase in Fallout New Vegas, as it has an in-game value of 20 bottle caps or so. And while it's true that your prices may be higher if you have a lower barter skill, if you take perks like Them's Good Eatin', I highly doubt you will ever need to deal with not having enough money to buy yourself purified water. I think it's also worth mentioning that unlike Fallout 4, where incurring any amount of radiation can affect the player's health bar, acquiring radiation in low amounts has virtually no effect on the player in Fallout New Vegas. It's only when you get to about 200 to 400 rads that you start to see some decreases to endurance, and by extension, your maximum health. So ultimately, as long as you never get your rad level too high in Fallout New Vegas, I don't really foresee this perk ever really being that necessary. Number 6, the Friend of the Night perk. Maybe it's just me, but I've never understood why Bethesda would decide to include a perk, skill, or ability in most of their RPG games that allows the player to see better at night when it's already fairly bright outside at nighttime as it is. Whether it's Fallout 3, Skyrim, New Vegas, or Fallout 4, you usually have the ability to see pretty well at night. And even if you are having trouble, you can usually turn up the in-game brightness, and all of a sudden you can see far better than you did before. The only situation I could foresee this perk being really useful is provided the player is playing with some mods that actually make the game world quite dark at night. Otherwise, this is a perk you should skip, as you can potentially waste perk points that would have been better placed elsewhere. Number 5, the Explorer perk. While you may find that this perk is nice on your first playthrough, as it does reveal all the map locations and could potentially inform you of somewhere you haven't necessarily been to yet, I feel that this particular perk is a waste of your perk points for a variety of reasons. The first reason is the fact that this particular perk only reveals the locations to you. You still have to actually go and visit the location in person in order to even fast travel to that location. Now, it would be one thing if you could fast travel to these locations in addition to them being revealed, however, that's not the case. The second issue with this perk is that you have to be level 20 in order to acquire it, and pretty much all of the other level 20 perks tend to be a much better choice. For example, Ninja is better for stealth melee characters, Solar Powered is nice during the daytime, and Grim Reaper Sprint is decent for restoring VATS after getting a kill. The third reason is that if you're on PC, you can simply use console commands to just reveal the locations that you haven't been to yet. Or even if you didn't do that, you could simply look up all the possible fast travel locations in the game on the internet, figure out which ones you haven't been to, then choose a fast travel point that you have that's close by, and just walk over to wherever that is. Again, maybe you could pick this perk up on your very first playthrough, but after that, I would recommend that you avoid it and pick pretty much any other perk. Number 4, the Eye for an Eye perk. So the Eye for an Eye perk is just dumb. If you're not familiar with this perk, Eye for an Eye provides a 10% damage bonus for each crippled limb that the player has. So assuming you crippled your head, you crippled your torso, along with both arms and legs, you could potentially receive a 60% damage increase. The thing is, if you were to cripple all these limbs, your character would be weakened to the point that I would argue that the bonus simply isn't worth it. Not only will crippling the player's head make their vision fuzzy, but crippling arms will reduce the player's accuracy and/or melee damage. Crippling the legs will also greatly impair the player's mobility, meaning you will move slower than you would have otherwise been able to. Now, if you were to have, say, like one crippled limb at a time, like one leg or one arm, the damage boost provided might be fairly decent for a gun user, as you don't need quite as much mobility. However, if you're a melee player, I would go ahead and say that this perk is totally counterproductive. As always, it's up to you, but I recommend that you avoid this perk. Number 3, the Here and Now perk. As cheesy as this is about to sound, there's a saying that there are good things that come to those that wait. Now, the Here and Now perk is pretty straightforward, as it just allows the player to level up again as soon as they take the perk. And while this may be tempting, just keep in mind that you're potentially wasting a perk point just so you can acquire this perk. And at level 10, when you can get this particular perk, you simply have much better options out there, including Finesse, which is excellent. You have Plasma Spaz, which is great for plasma weapons, or Math Wrath to help reduce your AP costs. I guess I could understand if you picked this perk on your very first playthrough. However, you're really better off using the perk point for Here and Now on a perk that will actually improve your abilities, rather than waste it to just quickly obtain another level. Otherwise, there's not much else to say about this particular perk. I would just recommend that you avoid it. Number 2, the Junk Rounds perk. So this perk actually sounds pretty good at first glance. After all, having the ability to craft ammunition from scrap metal and tin cans can potentially be useful. Assuming you have a spare casing for an ammo type that is compatible with this perk, you can make a junk round version of it that doesn't really have any noticeable drawbacks from the standard ammo variant. However, what would have been a really good perk is ruined by the crafting materials necessary to make the junk rounds themselves. In order to make one junk round of any compatible ammo type, you need 1 scrap metal and 5 tin cans. As you can imagine, this is simply impractical, as both scrap metal and tin cans weigh 1 pound each, meaning you would have to scavenge for 6 pounds of material just to craft 1 bullet. Not to mention that you have to find a large supply of both scrap metal and tin cans in order to craft your ammo this way. I think the worst part about this perk, though, is that you can't even use bent tin cans for your junk round ammo. You specifically need the standard unbent tin can that you can usually find out in the wild. And if you do have bent tin cans, you might as well just throw them out because they are completely useless as far as this perk is concerned. All I can say is learn from my experience and avoid this perk like the plague. And finally, number 1, the In Shining Armor perk. So this perk is useless simply because it's bugged and doesn't work. Now, normally what this skill would allow you to do is gain some additional damage threshold while wearing metal armor and wearing reflective eyewear. In fact, this particular skill would have been compatible with power armor as well. So you could gain some additional damage threshold, and that would have been fairly useful. But according to the Fallout Wiki, and I quote, "This perk does not provide any damage threshold boost due to the fact that the parameter that is referenced when checking the skill type of enemy weapons is quote-unquote energy instead of quote-unquote energy weapons. This means that the function quote is weapon skill type will never return a value that can activate the perk effect because there is no weapon skill called energy." So as I understand it, because this perk isn't scanning for energy weapons and is instead scanning for energy, the perk doesn't work. Ultimately though, if you're looking for what is potentially the worst perk in Fallout New Vegas, this is probably it. Though I suppose if you did want to use it, you could probably download a mod like the unofficial patch that supposedly fixes it. But alright guys, I think that's going to pretty much wrap up this particular video. If you liked this video, feel free to leave a like, click the bell to join the notification squad, and as always, take care, and I'll see y'all next time.